The rain hammered against the tin roof of the small cottage as Maria stood in the doorway, her worn dress clinging to her thin frame. She watched the black car roll up the muddy path, its expensive paint job somehow still gleaming despite the downpour. She knew who it was before the door even opened. William Thornton stepped out, his polished boots sinking slightly into the mud. He didn't seem to notice or care. At 42, he owned half the valley, including the land her cottage sat on. Maria's father had worked for the Thornton family his entire life, and when he died 6 months ago, she thought she'd at least have the home they'd promised him. She was wrong. "Miss Reyes," William said, climbing the 3 creaky steps to her porch. Up close, she could see the hard lines of his face, weathered from years in the sun but still handsome in a severe way. "I believe you received my letter." Maria's hands trembled as she gripped the doorframe. "Mr. Thornton, please. This is all I have. My father worked for your family for 30 years. He was promised this house. Promises made by my father, not by me." His voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel, but not kind either. "I need this land for expansion. You have 30 days to vacate." "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. At 24, she'd spent her entire life in this valley, knowing nothing else. "Please don't take my home." Something flickered in his eyes, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. He studied her for a long moment, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Then he spoke words that would change everything. "Then you must be my wife." Maria stared at him, certain she'd misheard over the storm. "What? Marry me. You can keep the house, and I'll provide for you properly. You'll want for nothing." He said it as casually as if he were discussing cattle prices. "That's insane," she breathed. "You don't even know me. I know you're honest. I know you cared for your father until his last breath. I know you've been working at the diner in town, trying to make ends meet." He paused. "And I know I need a wife." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. His jaw tightened. "My reasons are my own. But the offer stands. Think about it. You have until tomorrow evening." He turned and walked back to his car, leaving Maria standing in the rain, her mind reeling. She didn't sleep that night. The cottage felt smaller than ever as she paced between rooms, each step creaking on the old wooden floors. She thought of her mother, who died when Maria was 12. She thought of her father's calloused hands and his gentle smile. She thought of being homeless, of losing the only place that held her memories. And she thought of William Thornton's cold proposition. By morning, she'd made her decision. The main house of the Thornton Ranch was a sprawling structure of stone and timber, built by William's grandfather a century ago. Maria had only seen it from a distance before. Now she stood in its great hall, feeling impossibly small. "I'll do it," she told William, who sat behind a massive oak desk in his study. "But I have conditions." His eyebrow raised slightly. "You're in no position to negotiate. Then you're in no position to have a wife." She lifted her chin, summoning courage she didn't feel. "I want my cottage untouched. I want to keep working at the diner. And I want separate bedrooms." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, he nodded. "Agreed. We'll marry at the end of the week." The ceremony was small, held in the ranch's chapel with only the ranch foreman and the housekeeper as witnesses. Maria wore a simple white dress borrowed from Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, who'd been kind to her. William wore a black suit that made him look even more imposing. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, William's kiss was brief and cold, a formality, nothing more. The first weeks of marriage were strange. Maria kept to her routine, working at the diner during the day, returning to the main house for dinners that were mostly silent. William was often absent, managing the vast operations of his ranch. When they did interact, he was polite but distant, a stranger who happened to share her last name now. But slowly, things began to shift. Started with small things. Maria noticed William had the cottage's roof repaired without her asking. He began appearing at the diner for lunch, always sitting in her section, ordering coffee and pie while reading through paperwork. He never said much, but his presence became familiar, almost comfortable. One evening, She found him in the ranch's library, surrounded by ledgers. He looked exhausted. "You should rest," she said softly from the doorway. He glanced up, surprise crossing his features. "I have work to finish." "You always have work to finish." She stepped into the room. "Why did you really ask me to marry you?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My father's will. I inherit full control of the ranch only if I'm married by my 43rd birthday. Otherwise, it goes to my cousin, who'll sell it piece by piece to developers." "Your birthday?" Maria's eyes widened. "That was next month when you came to my cottage. 3 weeks after." Understanding dawned. "You needed a wife quickly, and I needed a home. A transaction." "Yes." He met her eyes. "I won't pretend it was anything more." But over the following months, it became more, whether either of them intended it or not. Maria learned that William rose before dawn every day to check on the horses personally. He knew every ranch hand by name and their families' situations. He was harsh but fair, and the people who worked for him respected him deeply. William, in turn, began to see Maria not as a convenient solution but as a person. He noticed how she saved half her diner tips to send to a widow in town whose husband had died in an accident. He saw how she'd transformed the cold, sterile main house into something warm, with flowers on the tables and curtains she'd sewn herself. The change happened gradually, like snow melting into spring. Dinners became conversations. Conversations became laughter. Separate bedrooms remained separate, but the distance between them narrowed. Then came the night everything changed. A storm worse than any in decades tore through the valley. Maria was at the cottage, having spent the afternoon organizing her father's old things, when the winds picked up. She tried to make it back to the main house but had to take shelter as trees bent and cracked around her. William found her an hour later, drenched and shaking in what remained of the cottage's porch. The roof had partially collapsed. "Are you hurt?" His hands were on her face, her arms, checking frantically for injuries. She'd never seen such fear in his eyes. "I'm fine, just cold." He pulled her against him, and for the first time since their wedding, the embrace felt real. "I thought, when I saw the damage, God, Maria." She looked up at him, rain streaming down both their faces. "William." He kissed her then, not the cold formality of their wedding but something desperate and real. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, everything had shifted between them. "I need to tell you something," William said as they made their way back to the main house. "That first day, when I saw you standing in that doorway, defending your home with nothing but courage, I told myself it was just convenient timing. But I think part of me knew even then." "Knew what?" "That I was already half in love with you." Maria stopped walking. "William Thornton, are you telling me this marriage of convenience has become inconvenient for you?" "Despite everything," he laughed. "Terribly inconvenient. I find myself unable to concentrate on work. I keep thinking about your smile. I rearranged my entire schedule to have lunch at that diner." "I noticed," she said softly. "I started looking forward to it." They stood in the rain, two people who'd entered a contract and found something neither expected. "So what now?" Maria asked. William took her hand. "Now, if you're willing, we start over. No more separate bedrooms. No more pretending this is just an arrangement. I want a real marriage, Maria. With you." "I want that too," she whispered. "I think I have for a while now." The cottage was repaired and became Maria's private space, a place to remember her father and the life before. But her home was now the main house, was William, was the life they built together. A year later, Maria stood in that same cottage, showing their newborn daughter the place where her story had begun. William watched from the doorway, much as she had stood watching him arrive that rainy day. "I'm glad you tried to take my home," Maria said, smiling at him. "And I'm glad you demanded to be my wife," he replied, pulling them both into his arms. What had started as desperation had become devotion. What had been a transaction had transformed into a love story. Sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances, and sometimes a poor girl and a rich rancher can find their way to each other, even when the path begins with an ultimatum in the rain.